since I've done a video. I've been mostly just working on the second novel, and then I've been having some stuff in my life that's just kind of kept me pretty busy. And right now, this video is going to be talking about like the hierarchy of importance. Um, Particularly with the second novel, because there's just so many characters, and then there's like side character arcs that are going on, and then villain arcs that are happening as well. You have two protagonists, you have Kate and Shadowclaw, and so you have a lot of stuff happening at the same time. And it's a lot to handle, and so I just kind of have to sit down and choose, okay, which characters are most important, which arcs are most important, because I can't give the same time and the same energy to every single character. I have to choose which ones I think are most important. So I kind of created this hierarchy of the different characters, and then just I'm gonna go and prioritize them from the top down. I'm gonna try and get everything in, but if there's another character that I think is more important than the character that's like the level below them, I'm gonna prioritize the higher level character. Um, and so I just kind of wanted to share my thoughts on this and talk about it. So for level one, of course, it's going to be the two protagonists, so Kate and Shadowclaw. Um, and the story is evenly divided between the two of them in the second novel. So like chapter one is Kate, and then chapter two is Shadowclaw, and then it just goes back and forth. And I really like that because it gives them both equal time to kind of go through their arcs. And with Kate's, the first half is the idea, should heroes kill? Um, that was something that I was debating about. And the first novel is that whole idea of, when is mercy too much? When is justice too much? And there's that sort of fight amongst each other, especially with the idea of, should Kate actually go through with ending Victor's life? And that was something that I was debating about for weeks. I have that planned. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I think I made a pretty good decision in that regard. And then in the second half of the novel, and I mean in the first half as well, especially since she's dealing with this question as well, is beginning to trust in herself. Especially since she's gone through so many difficult things. All of these trials, she's been just really struggling with, am I making the right decision? Um, am I really being the best hero and mother I can be? Um, there's a lot of self-doubt in the first novel, and even though it's getting a little bit better, it's still a struggle that she has in the second novel, and so she's trying to become more confident. And then the second arc is, of course, tyranny versus protection. And this one I thought was very good, very interesting. Um, it basically boils down to, when is protection becomes tyranny? When is protection too much? And for me, I feel like that role is very important for Shadowclaw because she struggles a lot with the idea of, I need to protect people and I think I know best. And especially given the extreme circumstances that that she's having to go through and Kate is having to go through and having to deal with people like Victor and other villains, is the idea of, I need to protect other people, which is a great idea, but what happens when that becomes an extreme? And I really like the idea because this is going to what's going to be putting Shadowclaw versus Kate in the second novel. So there's that idea as well. Um, and that's my very first level is those two versus those two levels. Those two arcs are very important. Um, the second level is of course Victor. It's going to be his downfall. Um, After a while, I mean, Victor was born to be a kind of static, more force of nature driven villain. He's the embodiment of evil, corruption, um, suffer like he causes a lot of suffering, and so he doesn't really change or grow. But in this novel, instead of sadism being his motivation, it's preventing humiliation and cementing his legacy. So just kind of like how um, Kate's and Victor's parents were kind of like his legacy is very important, and that's what Victor is trying to do. He's trying to cement his legacy, and so you've got that going on. But another thing is, since Victor doesn't really grow or change, it's time for his downfall. And I'm not going to go into details with it, but he will be completely defeated in this novel. And that to me is very important because it shifts the main antagonist idea to other characters that I feel like are more interesting at this point, kind of grow and change and I don't know, just kind of stand out a little bit more as Victor has just kind of remained the same and he hasn't grown, he hasn't improved. And so it's time for him to kind of go away. Um, what's really interesting is this is going to be happening halfway through the novel. So I need to get through his arc within the end of Act 3, which is around 60% of my novel. Ferner is very interesting because I'm planning on him being a secondary villain in this novel and then the main antagonist in the third novel. So I have officially decided to create a third novel. I would like to do that. I would kind of like to create Trinity trilogy. Uh, and Ferner is a very good villain for that. And what's going to be interesting is he's going to be like Victor, but with no weaknesses. And so he's going to have his kind of like own style. So I'm very excited for that, and he'll kind of bring other characters together. I have good plans for it. But it's something I'm working on. And so I'm just subtly working through that throughout the novel is creating Ferner as a bigger, badder villain and kind of get him to that stage where at the very end of the novel, he's a big, um, like a big antagonist, and that's what's going to lead into the third novel. Sienna is originally she wasn't supposed to be this high up, but the more I think about Sienna and what she's kind of had to go through and the struggles she's had to face with Victor, just a lot of relationship toxicity. Um, to me, I feel like I care about her more. And so her arc is breaking away from Victor and kind of causing his downfall. Um, and so I'm trying to get through that as well. I like it. I find it exciting. Um, I want her to be able to like find herself, to kind of move on and grow. without needing external validation, without having the sort of like pride that she has. And in this novel, it's not really going to show that, but I'm hoping to show that more in like the third novel. So I'm going to be bringing back a couple villains from this novel and putting them into a third novel. Um, and that one will be interesting because the villains that I will be bringing sorry, into that third novel, I'm planning on them becoming heroes. And so that means that they will have to change, that they will have to grow, they'll have to learn to work with other people, and this is going to kind of push Sienna onto that path. Um, but most importantly, I just want her to be free from Victor. Especially since I've written some of their relationship sort of stuff going on, and it's kind of disturbing. So I'm ready for Sienna to just kind of be free from abuse and be ready to um, kind of find herself and to kind of begin the path of becoming a better person. The fourth level is Henry and Jasmine. So with Henry, it's self-love. With Jasmine, it's becoming her own hero. Henry, I wasn't really expecting him to kind of go on this journey of self-love, and in the second novel, he still has those self-sacrifice tendencies. So he's still kind of working through them. It's better, but he's still struggling with them a little bit. And so I just kind of want that arc to be kind of finished. And then with Jasmine, she's very dedicated to following Kate. Um, I just find her fun and silly and kind of like a mini fairy tale. And so I kind of want her to like kind of become her own hero. And I haven't really decided yet if that means her becoming like her own sort of superhero or just choosing her own path along that way. Like maybe she becomes like a police officer and helps people out that way. But the most important thing is she's still remaining who she is, which is being friendly towards other people, um, being kind of a heroic individual, but maybe she doesn't need to follow Kate's footsteps in order to do that. And so that's what I kind of want Jasmine to kind of figure out is have her decide for herself what kind of hero she wants to be. Vanessa is a pretty big one simply because of her ties with Henry and her ties with Kate. Um, especially since like Vanessa is a lot like Kate. She's a mother and she's trying to take care of her son, and so there's a little bit of that going on. It's not as important, but there's maybe a little bit of an arc going on there. Um, I probably should put Winova above Vanessa. In fact, I think I'll do that right now. Because Winova is more important. And the reason why is she still has that tendency of like being a villain. She's still a villain. She's still selfish. She still hurts innocent people. She hasn't really changed. But what she represents is going to impact Shadowclaw in such a big way because those two are going to meet up in person once and for all and just finish the arc. And that is when Nova is going to be one of the key factors of whether or not Shadowclaw chooses to become a tyrant or choose like lesser sorts of protection. Um, because Manova is a lot like Victor in the case that she doesn't go through a redemption arc. She doesn't care. And that's going to cause a lot of friction to Shadowclaw. And so there's going to be a pretty big fight there. And it's going to push Shadowclaw on the towards the path of maybe I need to take more extreme measures to prevent other people from getting hurt from Winova, um, that sort of thing. So level 5, these characters aren't as important. Emma, the issue with Emma is I don't care about her as much anymore. Um, and I know that sounds kind of rude for me to say, especially since she's Kate's daughter and Shadowclaw's daughter, but at the same time, it's just I just don't really like her and care about her as much as I did in the first novel. And I'm trying to prevent her from being a damsel in distress in the second novel. That part of me just does not really care as much. I don't know what's going on there. Um, but I just don't really like Emma as much as I did in the first novel. And so she's kind of on a lower level. She's still trying to follow in her mother's footsteps, and I think maybe this is part of the reason why I don't really like Emma as much is Emma isn't as skilled as her mother, and she's a bit more prideful. Her main role is like in the battlefield is to kind of be tech savvy. And that's kind of an issue since Werner kind of plays a bigger role in that. I know right now it doesn't really make sense until you read it, but Werner becomes an ally for a little bit, kind of, kind of like a someone who appears to be an ally but isn't really, like a secret villain. But you can kind of see it coming. And so because Ferner is an AI, he's very tech savvy, that sort of stuff. Emma isn't as needed in the second novel because if Shadowclaw runs into something like a locked door, Ferner can just unlock it rather than Emma. And that plays a pretty big role in that, I guess, is sorry, Emma, you're just not playing as an important role in the second novel, and I'm sorry. Maybe some people won't really like that. I'm trying to maybe make it better. I'm just not really sure where to go with it. Um, Maybe following in her mother's footsteps, that sort of thing. It's just, uh, I'm just kind of at a loss with Emma. And part of it is I just, as a character, I just don't really relate to her. And so I don't really care about her as much, as sad as it is. These guys are kind of secondary villains, but they're still pretty important. And they're gonna have a little bit of character development, a little bit of struggles, but they're not as important in the second novel. But I am planning on bringing all three of them back in the in the third novel, and hopefully I'm thinking about making them become heroes, and that's where a lot of their growth is going to be happening. So they're not as important in this novel, but they'll be a lot more important in the third novel. Um, Insectoid, I wrote his section already. His section was short. And originally he was supposed to be on the same level as Jonas, where because they're such minor villains in this novel, they're not as important as other villains. But Insectoid is kind of interesting where he gets a complete redemption arc, where he kind of chooses to say, I don't want to be the bad guy anymore, sort of a thing. And even though his scene is very short, it's it's long enough that he can kind of reveal that redemption arc and why he's a better person now. He regrets what he's done, and he does one final act of helping someone um, before he passes away. And so that to me is part of the reason why he's a level 5 is he grows a little bit more than Jonas, even though both of them were supposed to be on the same level. Silas, this was kind of like a last minute sort of thing, but his is kind of going to be more romance. I know that sounds kind of silly, but I think it would be nice if Shadowclaw kind of had her own life. And so one thing that I'll describe here is that Kate and Shadowclaw are going to be separate. So Shadowclaw is going to be separated from Kate's mind, and they will have their own journeys and their own lives. And a big part of that is maybe Shadowclaw wants to find her own life. Maybe she wants to fall in love. And Silas can kind of help fulfill that role a little bit. And so I'm pushing that a little bit. And I like Silas as a character. I think he's nice. He's fun to kind of be around. He's pretty tragic, but he's trying to be a better person. And so I think he would be a pretty good romantic character for Shadowclaw. It's not a huge part of the story. It's just something minor that I think would be a nice addition to Shadowclaw, especially as she's trying to kind of find herself and her role um, in this novel. And Silas is a pretty good role for her to kind of experience romance by herself for the first time and fall in love a little bit. Of course, finally we get to level 6, which is the lowest level. These characters are really not as important. They still show up, um, but I don't really care much for them. Jonas is he's basically there to be an obstacle, and that's it. I didn't really care for him all that much in the first novel. He doesn't play a big role, doesn't have a big connection to anyone except for Kate. And when that was, it was basically I'm a bad guy, that sort of thing. So Jonas really isn't important. Kai, kind of the same thing. He doesn't play a big role. He doesn't really change anything. Um, and he's just kind of there to support some of the other characters. Um, and that's about it. He doesn't have a character arc at all. Ancient Ash and Ancient Walter, both of them are not really important. They show up, and basically their entire role is basically Victor trying to get people scared, and so he tries to torment. Well, I'm not gonna say tries. He succeeds in tormenting Interpol a little bit, and that's basically it. Is to kind of be like, fear me, that sort of thing. Um, but I mean, it's like only like 2 chapters in the novel, so it's really not that big of a deal. Um, but they show up. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on the hierarchy of importance for the second novel. And so I'm trying to do the best I can with so many characters going on and different arcs and stuff going on. So I'm trying to make a priority, trying to choose what's most important. Um, and those were kind of my thoughts on all of this. Thanks for listening.